Today, we are talking about the different branches of the nervous system. Our key concept is about the central nervous system that interprets information, and the peripheral nervous system gathers and transmits that information. There are two main branches of the nervous system, and then we'll talk about a few sub-branches later. The central nervous system, which we will abbreviate the CNS, includes the brain stem, and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, which we will now call the PNS for short, includes 4 systems of nerves. So besides the brain and the spinal cord, the rest of our body is full of different nerves, and all of those various nerves belong to the PNS. Now, this is a picture you guys had in your pre-lab last week that we talked about. We also had quiz questions on this. What order does our body process things? A sensory receptor senses something. We have sensory input, sends it to the brain. The brain puts out output to motor nerves, which generally go towards the muscles and the skeleton to make ourselves move. There are other effector glands and molecules too, but those are the main ones. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that process. So the CNS and the PNS pass signals between each other. They talk to each other. The sensory receptors generate an impulse. Now, we talked about our 5 senses. Every single one of our 5 senses has different receptors. Our eyes have photoreceptors that sense light. Our nose and our tongue sense chemicals. They have chemoreceptors. Our ear has mechanoreceptors, those little hair cells that bend back and forth and actually sense the vibration of sound. And then our skin has the 3 different receptors, the touch, the pain, the temperature, but some kind of sensory receptor generates an impulse. We talked about nerve impulses back in 29.2. They're also called action potentials to get that process going of our nerves talking to each other. All those nerves, part of the PNS, passes that impulse to the CNS, the spinal cord, and then the brain. The CNS, the brain interprets whatever that impulse is. The CNS passes that a new impulse back to the nerves in the PNS, and then the PNS stimulates some sort of response. Like I said, most of the time you're stimulating your bones and your muscles to move a certain way. So our brain structure, our brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, that big orange part in the picture. When you hear the word brain, you usually picture the cerebrum of something. But that is the part that controls thought, movement, and emotion. The cerebellum allows for balance and coordination, along with some structures in our ears. And the brainstem controls basic life functions. Those are things like heart rate and breathing that we don't control. Our body just automatically does them for us. The cerebrum is separated into 4 lobes. They're all color-coded there. The frontal lobe we always talk about first. It is responsible for emotional regulation, planning, and reasoning, and it is exactly in the place where you think it is, in the front of your brain. The frontal lobe of your brain, in the front. The parietal lobe integrates sensory information from the 3 touch receptors: pain, pressure, and temperature, and that is right behind the frontal lobe. So if you put a headband on, your headband would be sitting right on top of your parietal lobes. The third one is called the temporal lobe. Those are found at your temples. That's what they're named after. They process sensory information in the hearing and language department. They also have a memory center. And the occipital lobe, which is in the back of your head, that is your major visual processing center. So if you fell and you hit the back of your head really hard, there's a chance your vision would be compromised, because that's the part of the brain that controls vision. Your brain stem has 3 parts of its own. If we blow it up, the midbrain controls reflexes, and we'll talk about the reflex pathway in a minute. The pons regulate breathing. There's little tiny clusters of cells called respiratory centers in the pons. And the medulla oblongata controls heart function, swallowing, and coughing. The spinal cord, so the brainstem gets thinner and thinner and turns into the spinal cord, just a bundle of nerves found in your vertebrae. It has a special pathway called a reflex arc. Sensory neurons send an impulse to the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord turns around and directs the impulse straight back to a motor neuron. So you can see in the picture that that person is touching something hot, and the signal, that yellow line, goes up to the spinal cord and straight back down to the hand to say, let go, whatever that is. So the brain doesn't have to process anything. It's just, that's what a reflex is. So that pathway does not involve the brain. It is an immediate to the spinal cord, straight back down to a muscle. And then our nervous system, other nervous system sub-branches. Yes, draw this chart. That's why at the top it says draw this. So on the left, we talked about the central nervous system, the CNS is the brain and the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, has two more branches called the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, not automatic, autonomic. The somatic nervous system regulates our voluntary movements. That's mostly our skeletal muscle. When we move, we're doing that voluntarily. The autonomic regulates our automatic responses, or our involuntary movements, like our heart rate, our breathing. And then the autonomic system has two more branches. The sympathetic nervous system controls your fight or flight response. In some kind of an emergency, your body will do one of two things. It will fight or it will flee. So that is called your fight or flight response. Your sympathetic nervous system is in charge of that. And then your parasympathetic nervous system is when you're calm. It is in charge of the calmness and the conservation of energy. So that's pretty much what takes over when you sleep.